In my last video, I disassembled my GasGas EC350 engine after hydrolocking it and discovered I had a bent connecting rod. But now it's time to put this thing back together. Let's go. I've got everything I need now to start rebuilding this engine. The crank is back from the mechanic and it's been rebuilt with a Wasner connecting rod. This is the stock connecting rod that I bent. Now that it's separated from the crank webs, you can really see how bent it is. I got a new piston kit and all the gaskets I need to be able to put this thing back together. I've got new main bearings and I've got a fancy new engine stand to do it all on. The shift drum was a little hard to get in place as they usually are, but the gearbox is all done. I need to apply the RTV silicone to the left-hand side engine case, but before I do that, I'm just gonna oil all these bearings to make sure they've got plenty of oil in them for the first startup. I've just got a small amount of the RTV spread all over the case. You really don't want to use too much in this situation because you could potentially get some squeeze out that breaks off and then could block an oil jet. So less is more in this situation. Now I'm able to tell by the squeeze out on the outside of the cases that the squeeze out on the inside of the case will be very similar, and to me that looks just like how it came from the factory, so I'm pretty happy with that. I just used a zip tie for the tensioning arm to hold the spring in place while I was installing it. It just makes it a lot easier instead of like trying to hold all the little bits, and now I can just cut it off. bottom end is basically done, and now it's time for me to put my new piston in the cylinder. The workshop manual wants me to put the piston in the cylinder first and push it to the bottom of the bore, and then put it onto the motor and then push the piston pin in. I don't have a piston ring compressor to be able to put the piston in from the top of the cylinder. I think I should be able to put the piston in from underneath because the cylinder has this chamfer like most dirt bikes have, and I'm actually pretty used to usually putting the piston on the connecting rod first and then lowering the cylinder on top. So even though I don't have the piston ring compressor, I should still be able to pull this off. This cylinder has also been honed by a friend of mine who had a specific Nickersil hone, and it just came up absolutely perfect. I've already checked the end gaps of the rings and everything looks good, so let's try and get this thing in here. The piston is in the cylinder, went in nice and easy, and now I just got to put the cylinder base gasket, and the manual calls for a little bit of RTV across these little gaps here. So I picked off the dry stuff that was already there, and I'll put a smear of some new stuff. Circlip that holds the piston pin in was a bit of a pain to get in, and KTM recommends using a special tool, and I can see why, but I got it in there in the end. But now the cylinder's on, so it's time for the cylinder head. The engine's all done. I've just got it on the ground now, and I'm gonna video myself putting it in, but I'm gonna spare you watching me having to plug all this stuff in. I'm just gonna basically put it in, and then I'll just cut to me being ready to start it. The engine's back in, everything's plugged in, the exhaust is on, my back wheel is missing because my brother borrowed it, so don't worry about that. But unfortunately the battery was dead. I went to just hit it real quick to see if I could turn the fuel pump on, and nothing. So the battery's been sitting too long and is dead. So I've got this sketchy setup here where I'm using a Milwaukee 18-volt battery to sort of charge the battery, and I'm just monitoring it to make sure it doesn't go over 12 volts. I'll do anything right now just to get this engine started. Trying to charge my battery off the 18-volt Milwaukee battery wasn't really working, so I took it out to the car and charged it off that using jumper leads, which seems to have done the trick. So I've put it back in the bike now. I had enough juice to tap the starter button and get the fuel pump primed. So now's the moment of truth where I can try and start this thing. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous, but I built a few engines now, so I'm confident that I've done everything right, but there's always just that part of me that's, thinks like, what if? So let's go. The bike started super fast, which I'll take as a sign of a job well done. I didn't even film an outro before I took this thing for a ride, which is why it's all dirty. But if you've stuck around this long, I just want to say thank you for following along the process of rebuilding this engine. And if you're wondering how much everything cost, I'll break it down for you now. The new piston kit cost me $390, which came with a new head gasket and base gasket. The side cover gaskets cost me $60, and to get the crank rebuilt by a mechanic, because I don't have the tools or the know-how to rebuild a crank, cost $880, which included the cost of the connecting rod and new main bearings. So the total cost for me to rebuild this engine was $1,330. So it turns out dropping my bike in a river was a very expensive mistake. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you aren't already, please consider subscribing. Over 90% of the people who watch my channel aren't actually subscribed, so if you want to see my videos in the future when I upload them, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.